All right, welcome back to the Jim Acosta Show. It is Wednesday, February 12th. It's another day that ends in Y in DC, and you can see on the bottom of the screen with all the folks who are joining in, and lots of hearts going in the direction of the great Charlie Sykes, who has his own podcast and very important presence here on Substack. I'm going to get his take on what's been happening here in Washington. Oh, have there been things happening? Yes, there have been lots of things happening, lots and lots of things we will discuss. But first, a few headlines. NBC reporting inflation is up. Inflation for so called core items, which includes volatile food and energy prices, this according to NBC, climbed 3.3% over the past 12 months, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Of course, out on the campaign trail, Trump vowed time and again to lower prices for Americans. He said he would do that immediately after returning to the White House. That did not happen, but Trump earlier this morning, true to form, posted on his social media account Biden inflation up. And Trump and his allies have been signaling for days now that tackling inflation might take some time, you think, longer than what he promised out on the campaign trail. One other thing I want to point out before going to Charlie on the cabinet, on the Trump cabinet, the full Senate confirmed former Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard as the new director of national intelligence, largely along party lines. Kentucky Republican Senator Mitch McConnell voted against Gabbard's confirmation. The full Senate also advanced the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to become the next Secretary of Health and Human Services. A final vote on Kennedy is expected Thursday. And so, Charlie, host of To the Contrary, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the
Thank you.
program. Lots of places where we could start, but I did want to start on inflation because there's Trump rhetoric and then there's reality, the reality that you and I live in, and you and I both know, we all knew all along that tackling inflation was not going to be something that Trump could solve by waving his MAGA magic wand, and here we are. This is a tough nut to crack.
Well, it is a tough nut to crack because despite all the massive powers of the presidency, setting prices is not among them. And we could get into what Trump knew. Did he know that? I mean, this was low hanging fruit in the campaign. But it's interesting the cognitive dissonance between Donald Trump running on the cost of living at the same time one of his core principles is raising tariffs, which are taxes on consumers that will raise the cost of every, depending on how he imposes them, will raise the cost on every single item. So there was always a bit of dissonance is the nice word. Hypocrisy is a little stronger word. Bullshit is the most accurate word to describe
Sure.
all of this. But it is interesting that he doesn't talk much about the cost of living. He changes the subject. And of course, we have today's headlines.
Yeah, and I mean, he's calling on the Fed to lower interest rates, which of course the Fed is not going to want to do if inflation is still going up. And then there's the whole issue of the president of the United States pressuring the Fed to do anything. The markets aren't going to like that. The markets didn't like what took place today. And you're right on the issue of tariffs. I mean, I was going to mention this later, but I'll bring it in now. News from the heartland. Tariffs, will they be picking winners and losers? The Detroit Free Press reports that the CEO of Ford says that Trump's tariffs would blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry. Ford CEO Jim Farley, on the eve of traveling to Washington to meet with members of Congress and talk to them about Trump's proposed tariffs, said, quote, listen to this, let's be real honest. Long term, a 25% tariff across the uh, Mexico and Canada borders would blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry that we've never seen. Frankly, it gives free rein to South Korean, Japanese, and European companies that are bringing 1.5 million to 2 million vehicles into the U.S. that wouldn't be subjected to those kinds of tariffs. I mean, Charlie, the unintended consequences of the tariff policy from Donald Trump knows no bounds.
Okay, well, this is the key point: is the
Yeah,
unintended consequence. Downstream, what the
yeah,
effect that it will have on the supply chains. And this is the thing about Donald Trump. I mean, Donald
yeah,
Trump right now, he and Elon Musk are really enjoying breaking things, but they have no concept of what have actually broken or what those
yeah.
consequences will be. And the thing about Donald Trump has very few core values. There's very, very few things that he's really stuck on. And the tariff thing has been an obsession with him for decades. It's
Decades. Yeah,
interesting because there's so many people in the business community in the markets that keep saying, okay, we'll talk him out of it. He doesn't actually mean it, or it's a
right.
negotiating ploy. And yet, I guess my response would be, have you met Donald Trump? Do you understand how his mind works? And the
Yeah.
problem is that even the threats of the tariffs, I think, are going to have a long-term effect on our relationships with our allies, with Mexico and
Yeah.
Canada, whatever he does. And of course, it rattles the markets because
Yeah.
nobody knows, should you start stockpiling this, whatever. But again, tariffs are, to a man whose only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And this is Donald Trump's hammer.
Yeah, and there's no question about it. He talks about it in ways that defy the facts and common
Right.
sense and logic. And you and I both know, Charlie. I mean, presidents have used tariffs in the past.
Sure.
Obama's used them. Trump's used them. Biden's used them. They can be used in ways that are surgical and
Right.
precise and go after certain industries. If China is abusing certain practices or dumping products in the U.S.,
Correct.
that happened during the Obama administration. I remember President Obama going after the Chinese in that fashion. So you can't say you're anti-tariffs
Right.
altogether. They can be useful in some ways, but these blanket tariffs. And you talked about Canada. I mean, you and I both, I'm sure, have a lot of folks who listen to us up in Canada, and the Canadians are just hopping mad. As polite as they are, they're just as pissed off as they possibly can be right now at the United States because of Donald Trump. And I do want to get into Elon Musk, as you mentioned him, but the damage that is being done to these
Right.
strategic partnerships with our major allies, it's just extraordinary.
Well, I mean, that's the problem of taking a hard line in negotiations. Is you may get what you're after, but the on the other side of the table, that person is going to adjust. And right now,
Yeah,
you have all of our allies looking at the United States and saying, "Are they a dependable partner? Can we ever trust them again?" And of
yeah,
course, the war with Canada up until 5 minutes ago was a South Park episode, and now it is the president. By the way,
exactly.
Jim, you used a phrase though that I think is very, very important for people to understand.
Yeah,
It's also the way Trump uses tariffs as he uses much of the rest of his power to pick winners and losers.
yeah,
Now, the only other person to be president non-consecutively was Grover Cleveland, and he had the opposite approach to tariffs. He called them the communism of pelf, which was great, the word for grift. And what he
wow,
said was basically these create a lever for people in government to pick which business they favor, which business they don't favor,
yeah,
hand out laurels. And I think that you see that going on right now. One of the reasons why so many businesses and industries are coming in and kissing the ring and bowing the knee, etc., is
yeah,
because they don't want to be on Donald Trump's bad side because they understand that he can use these tariff regimes to help them, but also to punish them.
yeah.
And I think that that's really important for people to keep in mind exactly what that hammer in Donald Trump's hands could mean.
And some of this stuff just doesn't make any sense. I mean, Canada does not want to be the 51st state. They've never wanted that. Why we're talking about that, just seems like, bizarro world Twilight Zone stuff. And I've been talking about this with other guests. Sometimes I just wonder if it's just open mic night in the Oval Office, and just stuff comes out, and it's not fully thought through. It's just stuff coming out like a busted fire hydrant. And speaking of all that, I mean, yesterday he had this bizarre press conference in the Oval Office with Elon Musk.
Yes,
And Charlie, I've been kind of waiting to ask you about this because to me, this is what you and I could just spend hours talking
I
about
know.
this. But the image of Elon Musk standing next to Trump in the Oval Office, and depending on the camera angle, basically, almost behind the Resolute desk,
Mhm.
and of course his son was there as well. It just seemed to be like an image of a co-presidency. The figurehead president sitting behind the desk. He's not going to say a whole lot, but the guy who really is president is standing there taking questions, not admitting at one point that he's some of the things that he says will not be accurate, which I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
But Charlie, that means that Time magazine cover from last week that everybody got all riled up about was not that far off.
So you have covered Donald Trump up close and personal. So
Yeah,
I'm really interested in getting your take on this.
yeah,
But
sure.
and I also understand that people sometimes read too much into these things, but the imagery is important to Donald Trump. He cares about this stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah,
The Time
yeah,
magazine cover was embarrassing, but the picture yesterday was humiliating. I think Lawrence O'Donnell said it was what was the phrase? You look. Let me just look this up. The most powerless image of a president of the United States ever created by a camera. Okay, I'll
Yeah,
go with
that's right.
the exaggeration, but Donald Trump did not look like he was having a lot of fun, and the body language certainly was not for someone who would like to be thought of as of the master of the universe, striding the planet. And this is, of course, the central dilemma of the Trump Elon Musk relationship. There can only be one, right, Jim? I
That's
mean,
right.
at some point, you put those two egos into a bag, and only one of them is going to emerge. But at this point, I think maybe it's dawning on Trump that it's not going to be easy to extricate himself from Elon Musk. He can
That's
fire
right.
anybody else, but it's a little bit tough with Elon Musk. So how do you solve
Yeah.
that problem?
Yeah, and Charlie, you and I both know, because we're fairly long in the tooth, but that the image of the president of the United States matters. The image that is
Yep.
projected to the nation and Americans, but what's projected all over the world. The Reagan people were carefully,
Yes.
very conscious and in their choreography of Reagan riding the horse on his ranch in California and
Yeah.
so on. So much to the extent that, remember when George W. Bush came along, they tried to mirror some of that imagery with Crawford, Texas, and George W. Bush walking around
Yeah.
with the big belt buckle and cowboy boots and so on. You know, image makers, stage crafters of the presidency, they've been very conscious of this for decades. And so, why Trump, who is supposed to be this master of branding and imagery, would want Elon Musk with his dark MAGA hat and his boots and jeans, standing there in the Oval, almost lording over Trump. He's kind of lording over Trump, holding court. I agree. It almost felt like an incredible shrinking presidency kind of moment.
Okay, so you're mentioning
Yeah,
that the other presidents have cared about the image they present, but has anyone cared
absolutely.
as much as Donald Trump? Has anyone is anyone
Yes.
as more as is anyone more thin-skinned than Donald Trump? And so again, how this plays out, I don't know, but I am wondering after this photo op took place and he left the Oval Office and he asked, who thought this was a good idea? How is this actually playing out there? And
Yeah.
again, this may seem trivial, but this is a deeply petty man. And
Oh, yeah.
any discussion of Donald Trump that does not take into account his ego, his narcissism, his thin skin, and his pettiness doesn't understand the man or the way that he governs as president of the United States. So this is
That's
not
right.
just a one-off
And
question.
he thinks of the presidency as a TV show, as a
Yes,
continuation of his reality TV,
yes,
stardom. And I remember covering him when he came back from Walter Reed when he had COVID, and he
yes.
had that Evita moment on the Truman balcony. I described it as Covita
Yeah.
that day at the when I was covering him at the White House. And, he's always conscious of the cameras. He always wants them on. I've always been suspicious of this idea that they would kick the press out of the White House because how would he get the cameras into the Oval Office very quickly?
You get his
And
own cameras.
but it just seems to me, Charlie, uh, maybe it's that Trump has lost his step. He's just not there in the way that he was the first time around. And so I guess he's okay with Elon Musk kinda stealing his thunder and
Mm.
taking over. I just, I get what you're saying that at some point something's gotta give, but
But I don't know
I
what.
mean, but
Yeah.
he watches this stuff. He's addicted to coverage of himself.
I listen.
Yeah,
I don't think that can be overstated. I mean, I don't think that that can be overstated. That
yeah,
we think of government in terms of policy, in terms of the impact. He will always think of it in terms of a television show. And the fact is, he's got a very powerful reptilian instinct of what plays.
yeah,
If you watch some of the things that he talks about, and you sort of reverse engineer it, it's the kinds of things that maybe 8 years ago he would have heard on conservative talk radio. Now he sees on Fox News or other conservative media. It's always downstream from that. He's very, very conscious of that. That image didn't seem consistent with that. But again, let's be honest about it. We're 3 weeks into this presidency and he's moving at ramming speed. He's accomplishing almost everything that he would have wanted, or the people around him would have wanted.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, maybe he's lost a step, but right now, the people who are resisting him have not yet found their step, have they? So I mean,
No, that's
whatever
true.
weaknesses he has, right now, he's the one driving the agenda, and we're all trying to figure out, okay, who's going to take a stand against him? Who's going to stop him? Can he keep this pace up? Are there any guardrails left in the American system that's going to stop, Elon Musk and his co-president Donald Trump?
Well, and we can wrap it up with this, Charlie. What is the answer to that question that you raised? Because there seems to be a debate inside the Democratic Party as to how to handle all this. I was talking to James Carville, the Raging
Yeah,
Cajun, the other day, and his thought was, well, let's just pull back. Democrats should just pull back and let Trump fall flat on his face. I've seen Trump fall flat on his face. He did it during COVID. He'll probably do it again. But at the same time, what do you do between now and then? Do you just let the guardrails completely fly off the interstate and we all just go off into the ditch? To me, it seems uh, that there has to be some sort of pushback from the
well,
courts,
of
from the
course.
Democratic Party, because what one place you're not getting it is from inside the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell is the one guy who voted against Tulsi Gabbard.
Mitch
I mean,
McConnell.
extraordinary.
Yeah, did you have that on your bingo card?
I
If
did
somebody would
not
have
have
told you 5, 10 years ago that Mitch McConnell would be the only Republican senator to stand up
it.
against the Putin asset being put in charge of our intelligence agency, Mitch
Unreal. It's
McConnell,
unreal.
not Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell.
It's
Well, he's all out of
unreal.
touch. He's
It's
all out of
unreal.
touch.
And I know you used to be a conservative talk show host,
Yeah.
used to call yourself a Republican. This is not the Republican Party of John McCain and Mitt Romney and George W. Bush. It's gone. It's just so damn sad.
And it's not going to come back. So let's go back to
Yeah.
the Democrats.
Yeah.
Look, of
Yeah.
course they need to push back. Of course they need to resist. They have limited tools to do it legislatively. But I would say this: number one, there is no reason for any Democratic senator to vote to confirm any member of this administration, any of them. If the Republicans want, this group of misfit toys, this wretched hive, then fine, let them have it. They don't deserve any votes. Um, the Democrats do not need to bail Trump out on any of these issues. But also, I think it's important that the Democrats understand that their role right now is they have to be communicators. They have to raise these issues every single day and they have to ask themselves, all right, we said during the campaign that Donald Trump posed an existential threat to democracy. Did we mean it? We said that
Yeah.
Donald Trump posed a threat to the rule of law. Did we mean it? If we did, how are we going to act? Or are we just going to go through the rituals as if this is all normal, 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 which it is not? And
It
by
is not. Yeah.
and to your point on the Republican Party, it is gone. It's not coming back. You see today. I mean, this was a great day for Vladimir Putin, wasn't it? He had a twofer. He
Yeah.
gets Tulsi Gabbard installed as director of national intelligence, and Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth begin the process of surrendering Ukraine to him.
Yeah.
And so this is not the party of Ronald Reagan by any means.
That's right. No, this is no tear down this wall
Nope.
type of moment. Charlie Sykes, great to talk to you. I wish we could just keep going.
I know. Thank you.
I've got Alex Vindman set up, and you just delivered the perfect tease there
A
because
great
we're going to
American.
talk about what is taking place with Russia and Ukraine and the message that are being sent out of the White House to Russia and Ukraine. I mean, it's downright chilling.
It
But
is.
Charlie, great to see you. Good to talk to you. Let's keep the conversation
Yeah.
going. Let's keep doing this.
Anytime, Jim. Anytime. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Appreciate it. Good to talk to you. Thanks a lot. That's the great Charlie Sykes. Always good to talk to him. I'm going to bring in Alex Vindman because I believe he is now standing by. So stand by for that. Charlie Sykes is absolutely right that what we're dealing with right now is a sea change in terms of American foreign policy. What the Secretary of Defense, the former Fox host, Pete Hegseth, said earlier today, essentially saying that Ukraine is not going to be able to keep all of the territory that it had before this war with Russia. That was a very important moment. And then also this phone call between Trump and Vladimir Putin. Let's bring in Colonel Vindman. Alexander Vindman is there now. Good to see you, Alex, as always. And I was just talking with Charlie Sykes about this, and this big twofer uh, that uh, that Vladimir Putin pulled off today you have Pete Hegseth signaling that, well, Ukraine, I'm sorry, you're just not going to be able to keep all the territory that you wanted. But this is what the Washington Post reported today. Trump spoke by phone on Wednesday with Vladimir Putin in their first publicized call since Trump returned to the White House, breaking a years-long silence between the Oval Office and the Kremlin. Post goes on to say the call, which the Kremlin said lasted nearly 90 minutes, came the same day that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told NATO allies that Ukraine's stated goal of reclaiming its full internationally recognized territory was, quote, unrealistic, and offered a first outline of the Trump administration's a vision, I should say, for a peace deal. Alex, your thoughts? What do you think about what we have seen today? And there's this prisoner exchange we have to talk about as well. But your thoughts on this
Yeah.
news on Ukraine?
So I think this is where you have good intentions or intentions running afoul of Trump. If we rewind back the clock, maybe 48 hours, you have Marco Rubio talking about going to the Munich Security Conference. This is a global premier international security conference, way larger than European issues. It's global
Right.
issues, and he bills it as him going there to advance the cause of ending the Russia-Ukraine war. This was supposed to be the centerpiece. Now, mind you, this war should have been over what, according to Trump, should have been over before he was inaugurated, the day of the inauguration,
Right. Right. Yeah.
days ago. That all that was kind of a pipe dream, really empty, hollow promises that sounded pleasing to folks that he would be the peacemaker. Instead, we see belligerence, whether that's threatening Panama, Greenland, all sorts of different things. But let's just go to the professionals that are trying to manage U.S. national security, like Marco Rubio or not. He's practiced. He's a senator. He was on the
Sure.
Foreign Relations Committee. He went there with the intention of advancing the cause um, of ending the war. You also have Mike Waltz, the former congressman, former special forces colonel, that
Yep.
now the national security advisor, again saying that there is going to be a full court press to end the war. What do we have instead? We have Pete Hegseth potentially going cowboy, talking as if he's basically a Fox News commentator, spouting off the cuff, maybe coordinated, likely not coordinated, laying out a policy in which basically decades of U.S. Efforts to hem in Russian malign influence, that's kind of hybrid warfare and outright military aggression, kind of get undone. How does he do this? Because
Yeah.
he says two things. He says no prospect of Ukraine joining NATO, which is overturns policy that we've had since 2008, since the NATO Bucharest summit. In certain ways, that desire by the Ukrainians and the Georgians to join NATO to protect themselves against Russia in certain regards may have triggered Russia's military aggression back in 2008 against first Georgia and then ultimately against Ukraine for more
Yeah.
than 10 years. So he says no to Ukraine and NATO. Big problem. That was may have been just a faux pas from the
Right. He
Secretary of
ruled
Navy.
out NATO membership. He
Yeah.
ruled
Well,
out NATO
so
membership and sought to place the bulk of the burden for defending Ukraine on Europe. That's
yeah.
according to the Washington Post on his comments.
That's true.
Stunning.
I mean, I read the same things. I heard the same things. The problem is that it seems uncoordinated to me. It seems
Yeah.
so at odds with what was coming out. This just is Trumpism, kind of almost at its best or worst again. Taking an established policy, Rubio wants to end the war on terms that serve U.S. national security interests, stabilize Europe, put off Russia, and Mike Waltz says the same thing, and then you have it run headlong into chaos. So that's one thing. The other thing that he mentions is no Ukraine and NATO. He also undermines this basic notion of protecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations. This idea
Yeah.
that countries cannot attack their neighbors and benefit from them. In the same conversation, he says that Ukraine is going to have to give it up. Now, that kind of
Yeah.
rumination using is fine if you're, a Fox 5 host, but if you're
Yeah.
the Secretary of Defense, it sounds like policy. So
It
what he's
sounds like
doing is,
policy.
yeah, he's
It sounds
rewarding,
like policy. And
yeah,
that's what I'm wondering, Alex, is if what we're seeing, what we're witnessing right now
yeah,
is the beginning of a major change of US foreign policy as it relates to
yeah,
Ukraine. and whether we're going to see essentially the Trump administration, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, forcing Ukraine to give up
Yep.
territory for peace. And you and I both, we've both talked about this before.
Yep.
Where is the incentive structure to tell Vladimir Putin, don't do this again? Putin
Yep.
could take that deal, take the territory, and then 6 months to a year now, 2 years from now, want to take even more and say, well, I,
Two,
I got away with it the first time.
yeah, two critical points here. First of all, this is not just about Ukraine. This is about U.S. national security.
Yeah.
This is basically sending the message that strong states could play on the weak, absorb some costs, some sanctions, get have hundreds of thousands of their soldiers killed, but end out coming ahead with military aggression and taking territory. This is much bigger. This is now the NATO countries, especially the eastern flank, are terrified because the
Yeah.
message has been sent really emboldening Putin's aggression. And the same pattern that we've seen, certainly, for the last 20 years since Putin's in place, constantly bending over backwards, putting Russia first, like everything that we can do to accommodate Russia, even if it harms our own national security. That's the first thing. The second
Yeah.
thing that should be clear is that this does not in any way advance the cause of ending the war. What you'll have is Ukraine bending over backwards right now to do what they can to try to see if they can get the US on sides, to
Yeah.
try to see if there's something to do to add some rationality to this approach. But eventually they're going to give up. They're going to say, what's the point? The US is planning
Yeah.
on cutting off support. That doesn't by itself, frankly, cause the war to end on Russia's terms. Ukraine has the wherewithal to fight. The Europeans are still there. The Ukrainians are holding their own
Would the
against.
Ukrainians go there? Would they go it alone, along with the Europeans, and
Absolutely.
say, "Hey, sorry, United States, we'll see you in 4 years"? Is that possible?
Or as long as they can. I don't know if they
Yeah.
have the means to last 4 years, but they
Yeah.
would not. That's at least 6 months of the Ukrainians not relenting, doubling down. The U.S. losing all influence over Ukraine and having no influence to speak of in Russia. Because let's be clear, Putin is not the least bit accommodating to the U.S. wishes. He's going to grab all he can and bank it, and then advance his position, and that's it. So what you have is a situation in which the U.S. has no influence in Russia, will lose influence in Ukraine. Ukraine will go it alone with European support, but in
Wow.
a scenario where Ukraine is potentially weaker in certain regards. We should be clear about one other portion of this. There's a false narrative that Russia, as if the U.S. is out, the Russians win. That is not. It's not that simple. The simple
Interesting.
fact is that the Russians are under enormous pressure themselves. They're taking 1,500 casualties a day, killed and wounded. Their economy is teetering. There is a scenario in which the U.S. gives them a lifeline, alleviates sanctions, and makes it easier for them. But right now, it is very, very precarious. So what their Russians are hoping for is they're hoping for a highly successful bluff. They're hoping for a scenario in which they could convince the U.S. to alleviate sanctions on them,
Right.
put pressure on Russia on Ukraine, and Russia comes out on top. Even if the
Yeah.
U.S. just didn't change policy at all, if it just stayed shut its mouth, Trump just shut up, we you would
Well,
end
he's
up
not
with a
going to do
situation.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. He's not going to do that. He hasn't been
he's
doing that
not.
very much lately.
Yeah,
You're talking about Canada or Gaza or the
yeah,
Panama Canal, whatever. And Alex, I did want to ask you about this prisoner exchange. Apparently, the administration is preparing to release a Russian cyber criminal as part of the prisoner exchange that led to the release of
yeah,
the American school teacher Mark Fogel. They're preparing to release Alexander Vinnick, who pleaded guilty to money laundering in 2024. He's a nonviolent offender, according to the New York Times, forfeiting tens of billions of dollars in assets in the exchange. What did you make of that prisoner exchange? Initially, it was sort of forecast as, "Oh, look, we just got Vogel out. What a great job we did!" And as it turns
yeah.
out, there is an exchange going on here.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you
Yeah.
again rewind the clock, 6 months or 8 months ago, um, Trump Inc. lambasted Biden for doing a prisoner exchange, giving up hardened Russian criminals in exchange for American citizens. That obviously is, not relevant now that it's Trump doing the exact same thing. Anytime we have a wrongfully detained American coming home, That's a good news story. We
That's
should
a good
herald
news
that.
story.
We should celebrate it. But let's not be, let's not be two faced. And if we're going to damn Biden for doing a prisoner swap, which of course the Russians were going to do, they were never just going to give up
No,
somebody for
exactly.
something for nothing. Then we should also understand that Trump is compromising in the same way, although potentially in worse. Like I think for Trump to get a public look facing win, whatever slides underneath the table, whatever deal backroom deal is done, it could be it could be the worst deal possible. But if it scores Trump some sort of you know points to demonstrate that he's doing something, he'll do it. So at least with
Yeah.
the Biden administration, there was a cool calculation about what these people do and how harmful that could be for U.S. interests. I don't have that same confidence in the Trump administration because everything will be sacrificed to Trump advancing his own image, his own personal
What's
agenda.
in it for me?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right.
What's in
So
it for me? Yeah.
yeah, all in all, a really disastrous 48 hours, I'd say, for U.S. national security. Something
Yeah.
in for me as a former Army officer, for military, I see this as an increment moving our troops to a place where they will be involved in combat against our adversaries, whether that's Russia or China, because what we're doing is we're sending the message that everything's in play. That's a recipe for accident or miscalculation.
And that and I wanted to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard getting confirmed, and I wanted to get your take on that. But you raise an interesting point, and it's something that's been on my mind, and it's something I think you and I've talked about before, and I want to talk about it again. Do you have confidence that a President Trump would rally behind a NATO country, a Baltic state that is invaded by Russia, that he would honor uh, Article 5 of the NATO Charter? If one is attacked, all are attacked. What are your thoughts on that? I'm pretty damn worried that he would not. And then what the hell happens after that?
Yeah.
Probably don't have enough time to talk about it, but
we
your
we
thoughts?
have some time.
Yeah,
I would say that
yeah,
it should be terrifying.
yeah,
This is a in certain regards a worst case scenario. It doesn't require Trump to withdraw from NATO to make NATO toothless. If Trump is indicating that he's not willing to risk um, you know U.S. involvement to support our NATO allies, then it is an invitation for Putin to test NATO resolve. And NATO is still powerful without US involvement. It is not a paper tiger. It has lots of capability. The European economy is 10 times the size of the Russian economy. They have underinvested in defense, so it is not by any means a gimme, and Russia's been beaten up severely. But this is an invitation for a broader war, and
yeah.
this should keep people up at night, that we're inviting a scenario in which Russia continues to be aggressive, not just against Ukraine. This is what we've been talking about for 3 years, and this is really, in fact, kind of what I talk about in my book that's coming out later on this
Yeah.
month, how we had these series of missteps across administrations, Republican and Democrat, that either inched us along or lurched us forward, like the Trump administration, and that we need to do better. We need to think about the long term, big picture. How do we secure U.S. interests, not stumble in and creep into a disastrous situation like we did with the Russia-Ukraine war in the first place, or maybe even something bigger going forward.
And your thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard? She is now the director of national
Yeah,
intelligence.
yeah,
And it's astounding to me, and it feels like, like something out of a movie, like that somebody like Tulsi Gabbard could become the director of national intelligence. You've worked in that realm. Can the intel community work around her? Can they just
yeah.
can you do the work without going across, having that work go across Tulsi Gabbard's desk? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I'd say that, the remnants of the professional, nonpartisan intelligence services are going to be mindful of the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is potentially compromised.
Yeah,
So that degrades this communication. I think there's always within the Trump Inc. There's always these territorial knife fights. Sometimes they're working the same page. towards a nefarious end. Sometimes they're working at cross purposes. So we will have this kind of tension. But what I could assure you of is that our allies that have been sharing intelligence with us will think twice about what they share, based on the fact that we have Tulsi Gabbard in the chair as the director of the Office of oh my god, ODNI,
National intelligence. Yeah, no, no, of
National
course.
Intelligence. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. The very office that was created after 9/11 to make sure that intelligence wasn't stovepiped, that it wasn't going up, the FBI's over here and the CIA's over here and the DIA is over here, and they're not sharing intelligence with one another. That was one of the conclusions of the 9/11 report, that you needed to have a director of national intelligence, so all of that intel would flow into essentially one office to make sure we're all talking to one another. And you have to think that there are going to be people in each of those individual agencies who are worried about having Tulsi Gabbard at the top of all of
Yeah.
that. That to me is concerning as well.
Yeah. Who's going to want to give up their sources and methods when we have a president that mishandles classified, that shares, the various operational activities that the Israelis are undertaking, if you recall that happening during Trump's term, or now a compromised ODNI that has ties with Russia that are unclear, or Syria that are unclear at best, or maybe in their calculations
Yeah,
truly compromised. So it's a dangerous situation. We really have. It's a shocking how many of Trump's cabinet secretaries that are wholly unqualified are making it through. We have
it's
RFK up next,
incredible.
that is going to compromise U.S. health, our ability to stay ahead with regards to biomedical research long term, or frankly, our health and safety with regards to vaccines. And Kash Patel, God forbid, that guy gets through as the director of, will be the director of retribution for the Trump administration. That hand will not just fall on
Yeah,
Democratic opponents; it'll be a falling on Republicans that don't toe the line also. So some pretty, about as bad as I was imagining it was going to get, but it's going to get worse.
yeah, yeah. A lot of folks have been describing it as an idiocracy. I think it's a vengeanceocracy. In many ways, it's about carrying out Trump's pledge, and we talked about some of the promises he hasn't kept since coming into office. But he is going to keep the promise of being the president of retribution. He campaigned on that during the campaign. I think he's going to do it in the Oval Office as well. Alex Vindman, great to see you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really good to talk to you. We'll talk again
Awesome.
soon as well, I'm sure. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Definitely.
Good to talk to you.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye, Jim.
Thank you. Bye bye. And so, I did want to conclude and my thanks to Charlie Sykes and Alex Vindman. I mean, they're both excellent. Remember when Barack Obama used to call Bill Clinton the explainer in chief? I think Charlie Sykes and Alex Vindman are kind of cut from the same cloth. They just speak in real talk, and they can explain very complicated, very worrisome topics in ways that we can all understand. I'm very thankful to both of them. I do want to mention a couple of things, and I'm going to call this is a different segment that maybe we'll do from time to time. I'm calling it From the Dear Leader Files. The Washington Post reporting this: the Kennedy Center Board of Trustees voted Wednesday to install President Trump as chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center here in Washington, cementing the plan that Trump announced Friday to overhaul the storied arts institution with him at the helm. This is out of the Washington Post. You can't make this stuff up. Maybe he'll do a one-man show. He'll take the Oval Office show on the road, and perhaps maybe Broadway will be after that. I don't know. But, to me, what are we doing here in Washington? What are we doing when Donald Trump is the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center? I mean, first of all, I thought the chairman of the board was Frank Sinatra, but putting that to the side, Donald Trump, the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, sounds like something from a dystopian play that would be featured at the Kennedy Center. It doesn't make any sense. The other thing that I have to mention before I let everybody go, um, another episode from the Dear Leader Files. The president of the United States should not be in the business of punishing news organizations for refusing to be red pilled. Um, Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. The Associated Press reporting the White House blocked one of the AP's journalists from an event in the Oval Office on Tuesday after demanding that the news organization alter its style on the Gulf of Mexico, which Trump has ordered to be renamed the Gulf of America. Basically, they kicked out a reporter from the AP out of the Oval Office, wouldn't let them into an event because they refuse, because the AP is going to continue to call the Gulf of Mexico by its name, the Gulf of Mexico. It is not the Gulf of America. It's only the Gulf of America if you surrender yourself to Trump's warped imagination that he can just go around and look at things on a map and rename them in his honor or in the honor of what he sees fit. It's goofy, it's nutty, and to me, it's kind of like the National Geographic being kidnapped by the My Pillow guy. We're not going to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. We're just not going to do it. And I think my hat's off to anybody in the press. And here's Duke now. Duke's coming in. He's not going to call it the Gulf of America. We love America. We love America. I got George Washington over here. I got the Statue of Liberty over here. I got Greg the Plant right there. We love America. That's not in dispute here. The dispute is over whether we're going to just surrender ourselves to the warped imagination of the man in the Oval Office. We're just not going to do that. We're not going to call Washington D.C. the Emerald City. This is wicked stuff, y'all. Wicked stuff. And finally here, just wanted to encourage folks to take a look at my Substack post today. It's on another topic, the epidemic of mass shootings in this country, and one father's determination to keep his son's story alive. It's the story of Guac, who is Joaquin Oliver, and his father, my friend Manny Oliver. Manny puts on a one-man show here in Washington about the death of his son, Joaquin, who died in the Parkland school shooting on Valentine's Day of 2018. That anniversary, that terrible, tragic anniversary, is coming up on Friday. Please take a look at that post. And if you're in Washington, please go see Manny's show. Manny's show may be coming to a community near you. If it is coming to a community near you, take a look at that as well. It's a must see. In the meantime, still reporting from Washington with Duke right here. He wants to play. He just brought me his toy. There you go, Duke. Go get it. On behalf of Dookie Acosta, on behalf of Greg the Plant, I'm Jim Acosta. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.